There's an executive summary, background and purpose. A lot of this has already been done through workshops in the state. Doesn't mean it's done. Like I said, this is a type of document that's never done, so it's always going to be coming up for review. So if you read what's in the background and purpose and you don't like what's in there, there'll be an opportunity for input at a future date. The planning process itself, this is something that'll be written last because it'll describe everything that we went through to write the first edition of the State 911 plan. Goals and objectives. That was also done through workshops. A first draft of that is already available on the website. Introduction, there's a national overview of the history and background of 911. A lot of that information is available online. Since we're talking about the national overview, it's kind of a background of where the nation is as far as 911 goes, so then we can talk about where we fit in on that. And so the next section then is an overview of the history and background of 911 in Colorado. The 2008 State of 911 report that was actually written by Kimberly Culp actually contained a lot of background as far as how 911 got to be where it was by that day in Colorado. So a lot of that information from that State of 911 report went into this section, and then through workshopping we brought it up to the current day. And that's something that's going to have to be kept up to date regularly as well. Current 911 environment, current legislative and regulatory environment, that was written through workshop. Again, already up there, the first version. Current 911 technology, same thing. PSAP integration with emergency communications, telecommunications, and information networks. They like nice, short, concise titles on these things. So, again, though, we went through that through workshops and wrote the first draft. Economics, current funding mechanisms. That was done through workshop. Current revenues and costs. That was actually written in first draft form using data that has been collected through the Resource Center but has not been workshopped yet. Everything will go through a workshop process eventually. Next generation considerations. And that's where we've been kind of stuck for a while because we were waiting kind of for some sort of consensus to start developing out of the Next Gen 911 Steering Committee. We now have the option study that was published last year, and we have several meetings of the Next Gen 911 Steering Committee that we can use to start formulating this section. So that's a section that will be written, that has not yet been written, but we know where we're getting the material from. Allocation, distribution of state and federal funding for equipment and operations. That one, a first draft was written by the Resource Center. It was posted for review on the website. It has not yet been workshopped. So when we start these workshops back up, we're going to be putting that back in the queue for workshop. Training standards, Resource Center PSAP profile data. That's one of the reasons why I start asking those questions about training in the online PSAP profiles. And the Training Standards Committee, which we're going to be talking about right after this. Those are the sources that we're going to use to fill in that section there. Future environment, technology. Information may come in part from the Next Gen 911 option study, but mostly from the Next Gen 911 Steering Committee discussions. Governance, same thing. Funding, same thing. So again, you see why we were kind of waiting on this, on the developments of this last year to be able to move forward. Training standards. Training standards are not actually part of the Model State 911 plan. We actually added that in because if somebody's coming in from the state, coming in from out of state and wants to learn quickly what is going on in 911 in Colorado, not talking about training at all at the local PSAP level seems like a omission. So from the discussions that the Training Standards Committee has, we'll be able to fill in that section as well. Updating the plan, in other words, what is the process going to be for making sure this stays up to date and fresh as we move forward. A conclusion, which can just be drafted. The Resource Center could draft that and bring it out to a workshop. It could be rewritten in workshop, or somebody else could write a version and submit it. References, obviously we can do that. Project initiation and management. Doesn't really apply to us. That appendix may still stay in there. That's more for a specific entity that wants to take on a project to actually implement Next Gen 911 in Colorado, for instance. So once the Next Gen 911 intergovernmental agreement agency that Barbara was talking about, if it happens to come into existence, if it's actually accepted by the 911 authorities of the state, that organization might use this section to document their project management. Glossary, you can take care of that. So you can see the sections in there, you know, the sections that are about what the current state of 911 is in Colorado have for the most part been written and been workshopped, and we can go back to those and refresh them and maybe add more to them through future review of those sections. But the sections that we've been waiting on are the sections dealing with topics that are very much the domain of the Next Gen 911 Steering Committee. So now that that committee has had some discussions and their subcommittees have had some discussions on those very topics, we'll be able to start writing those sections. Particularly now that they're getting to the point, those subcommittees are getting to the point that they can start making recommendations. So moving forward, my encouragement would be to make sure that everybody who wants to participate does participate. The first round of workshops we actually went out to the two local communities around the state and held the workshops at different locations. In some cases that worked fairly well. In some cases it just made it so that we didn't have very good turnout. So what we'll probably do in the future is all of the workshops will probably be done by webcast now that we have that capability available to us, so that people can participate at an equal level no matter where they are in the state. And they'll all be able to look at the same documents at the same time. They'll be able to comment on documents and so forth. So what you can do is you can review the full current draft, which is currently on the Resource Center website. If you go to www.co911rc.org, left-hand side of the page, down near the bottom of the navigation bar, there's an option that says State 911 Plan. And if you click that, you'll have links on that page to view the full current version of the State 911 Plan. And there's the link right there, if you want to go directly to it. And again, this presentation is now available on the website as well under the 2012 911 Issues Summit. Watch for announcements from the Resource Center for the availability of new sections to review. And in order to make sure that you get notices on that, I'm going to ask you to go and check out your user profile. Some of you have user profiles on the Resource Center already, and some of you don't. So the link that's on here will take you to a page that has links for new users and also for people who want to update their profile. And once you get into your profile, either a new profile that you've created or an existing profile, make sure that state plan is checked under your contact preferences. So if state plan is checked, then you'll get any notices that I send out about the State 911 Plan workshops, opportunities to submit comments. Some of it may be done by workshop, some of it may be done by, we might post a section and ask for people just to submit written comments. It probably depends on what type of section we're talking about. And then you can submit comments to specific sections that are on that page using the form at the bottom of the state plan page. And again, there's a link there that takes you to the state plan page. And if you go scroll down to the bottom, there's a form that's been set up specifically for submitting comments. And you can do that whether a specific section is under review right now or not. If it's not under review right now, then we'll hang on to that comment and we'll bring it up the next time that section comes up for review. So I went through that a little fast maybe, but I want to know if anybody has any questions about what the State 911 Plan is or what the purpose of it is, what it is not, again, because that's kind of an important point as well. I don't want anyone to think that this is something that the Resource Center is trying to use as an authority over local jurisdictions, because that's definitely not the intention of it, or how to participate. Does anybody have any questions on any of that or comments? Okay, easy enough. So that brings us to our last topic for the day, and that is the Training Standards Committee. And I want to give a little bit of a background on that, and then we're going to move into a panel And I know some of my panel members couldn't make it, but for those of you who could make it, if you wouldn't mind coming on down, and we'll, see, I gotta make sure okay, I think I've got enough chairs. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and telling us which agency you're with.
Hi, I'm Kim Carroll with Denver 911.
I'm Jennifer Kirkland with Vail Public Safety Communications.
Hi, I'm Monica Lynn with Grand Junction Regional Communications Center.
And Karen Kretzel was also on here today, but she wasn't able to make it. So, giving a little bit of background on the Training Standards Committee right now. Most states have some sort of minimum standard for public safety dispatchers. They vary widely from state to state. Colorado was at one point one of 18 states that did not have a training standard of any sort for dispatchers. I believe that number has shrunk now, but I don't know what exactly it is off the top of my head. There is a link on here that will take you, if you're interested in what other states are doing as far as training standards go, there's a link that will take you to a national survey. Part of it was taken from a survey that already existed, and then I supplemented with information from states that didn't have any information in the first survey. So you can kind of get an idea looking through there what some other states are requiring as far as training standards for dispatchers. There's also some additional pressure on right now, and it has been for several years now, at the national level from organizations that would like to see greater standardization of dispatcher training among the states. One of those organizations is the Denise Amber Lee Foundation. It's actually a nonprofit organization that was created specifically to seek improvements in the delivery of 911 service, and they focus quite a bit on training standards as well. APCO is another organization that, through their provision of, they provide training standards and really encourage local 911 authorities and PSAPs to take advantage of those. So those are some of the things that have kind of built up to in the last few years. And I won't say that, it's actually probably the last few decades. There have been multiple attempts at this here in Colorado with different groups of interested individuals coming together at different times and trying to determine how, if it's at all possible, and if so, how we want it to look to create a standard for dispatcher training in the state of Colorado. So the most recent effort has included individuals from across the state, meeting in person and by conference call. The Resource Center has used its training contacts to basically contact people from around the state and say, hey, look, we're doing this. We're just getting together and talking right now. It's kind of an informal discussion. If you want to be a part of it, then feel free to join in. And we've actually had a lot of really good turnout at these meetings, a lot of good discussion. And a summary of the basic discussions has been posted on the website. Again, co911rc.org. Go to the left-hand side. There's a link that says training standards. Or actually, I think it just says training. And if you click on that, it'll take you to a page that has everything we have about training on there. But there's a section for the Training Standards Committee. That'll probably be coming its own page here pretty soon. And basically how we started was, we started by looking at specific questions about training. If you wanted to create a training standards program, there are certain questions that you would have to answer as to what you wanted that training standards program to look like. Got to make sure I'm keeping my PowerPoint up with what I'm saying. The first question we looked at was voluntary versus mandatory standards. A lot of states have mandatory training standards for dispatchers. If it's going to be mandatory, it is generally done through legislation. The working group, and I say working group because at this point, when we're talking about the process, this was just a group of individuals getting together and talking. There wasn't a committee structure set up at that time. The working group opted to only consider voluntary training standards this time. And for each of these questions, and it goes into a lot more detail in the document that's available on the website, but for each of these questions, a list of pros and cons was developed for each of these. The main pros for the fact that for a voluntary training standard over a mandatory training standard is that, number one, you don't necessarily need legislation to make it happen if it's voluntary. Number two, you will probably get better buy-in from the 911 community across the state if it's something that they don't feel like they're being forced to enter into. Mandatory, really the best pro of a mandatory training standard program is that you would have greater consistency. So the question, the challenge then, if you want to go with a voluntary training standard, is just how do you increase or maximize the participation rate. The next question that was asked was national versus homegrown standards. You can have a standards program that has already been used and is in use in other states across the country. I'm talking about like APCO's Public Safety Telecommunicator course, PowerPhone's Basic Telecommunicator course. National Academies of Emergency Dispatch has a emergency telecommunicator course that kind of goes before all of their EMD and EFD courses. Or you can get together as a group of stakeholders in your own state and create your own curriculum. What the working group has decided to do at this time is to pursue a homegrown training program. Again, there was a list of pros and cons that were discussed thoroughly by the working group, and the pros of a national program are it has better recognition, it's already there, why reinvent the wheel? But one of the big cons is that it costs more money than if you develop one in state. If you have to pay APCO for every dispatcher that you send through the program, for instance, it can get fairly expensive and perhaps prohibitively expensive for rural 911 authorities that don't have a whole lot of money to begin with. Curricula versus program-based training standards was one of the things we looked at. So in a curricula-based training standard, you have, if you're familiar with APCO's PST1 course, the Public Safety Telecommunicator 1 course, it's actually a 40-hour classroom curriculum. So that would be an example of a curricula-based training program, where you have dispatchers going into a classroom environment and actually receiving specific content that's been prescribed by the program itself. A program-based training standard is one in which you would look at the components of the training program of a particular PSAP. The only real example that we could find of this that's actually in use is APCO's Project 33, which is not so much a list of the things that a new dispatcher has to learn in a classroom, but it has more to do with, do you have daily observation reports for your dispatchers when they're on the job training? Do your trainers have to go through additional training before they're allowed to train somebody on the radio? Is there a checklist that they have to go through of everything that the dispatcher is supposed to learn before the end of the training process? There's a lot more to it than that, but those are just some of the things that are included. What the working group decided on through their consensus discussions was actually a hybrid of these two things. The consensus was to approach it as a program-based training standard, to actually encourage dispatch centers to have a good training program in place in their policies, but then in addition to that, to also offer a classroom content program that they could send new dispatchers to. This was done especially to help those rural 911 authorities that may not be able to have enough new employees at a given time to make it worth them putting through an academy, or may not be able to afford to send them through something like APCO's PST1. Regionalized versus PSAP-based training. So the question was, do we want to train people, do we want to offer a training program that each PSAP would then have to do in-house, or do we want to try to, even though this requires a little bit more coordination, a little bit more of an ongoing effort, do we want to try to offer this training on a regional basis so that the local PSAPs won't have to provide it themselves if they want to participate? And this is a question that hasn't been gone into a whole lot of detail on, but the general consensus was that a regionalized approach was a good idea. Trying to get out to different parts of the state so that people didn't have to travel that far. As part of the research that that we did for this part of the discussion in the Training Standards Committee. You can see the counties in green. I did a little survey just by email of counties and said, would you have a training facility that you would be willing to allow people to use for a training standards program? And the counties in green are the ones that said yes. And if you take into account that 6 of those counties down at the bottom are all of them are operated out of one PSAP, there's no PSAP in the state that's more than 2 counties away from one of these locations. And I think with just a little bit of recruitment and saying, you know, are you sure you don't have a training facility we might be able to use? I bet we could even get that down even further to where maybe they're only 1 county away from a facility that could be used for training. So the idea that we could get out in the different parts of the state to provide this training program, the academy class, so that people didn't have to travel far or spend a lot of travel funds to make it happen, was kind of where that came from. The form of the committee, and this was something that was finally decided upon at the last working group meeting. Until the August meeting, the Training Standards Working Group operated strictly on a consensus basis. Following that meeting, it was decided that the working group is going to form into a committee with actual officers and a structure so that it can move forward and exist on an ongoing basis. The problem with a working group is that if you have a few interested individuals who are really pushing it forward and keeping it going, and something happens to them, they change jobs or retire or move on, then suddenly the momentum of the group can kind of fail. But if it's set up as a permanent structured committee, then it can exist in a little bit more of a ongoing form. So here's the current status. At the last working group meeting, the working group decided that they wanted to form into a committee. The Resource Center has agreed to write a draft set of bylaws for this committee, which will then be sent out to every 911 authority in the state, every PSAP in the state, so that you can have your training people look at it, you can have your directors look at it, and submit comments back. Because even if you haven't been participating up to this point, we want to make sure that you have a say in what this final organization looks like. And you will also be invited to participate in the next meeting it'll still be the working group at that point. And then at that next meeting, the bylaws can be, people can submit ideas on how to improve the bylaws that have been submitted in draft form. And if the group can agree upon a final version of that, then they can vote to accept that, and then to elect officers. And from that point on, it'll be a committee. And right now, the Resource Center, all we've been doing is holding these meetings to kind of facilitate discussion. And from that point on, we'll just do what we do for other groups, such as posting minutes on the website and things like that. And it'll be up to those committee members and officers to keep the ball rolling and make the decisions that have to be made from there on out. And then the next thing that's going to have to happen after that is the Training Standards Committee will then start working out the details of what this training program will look like. And we've already talked about it in kind of a basic form, a program-based training standard with also an academy component to it. But what topics are going to be covered in that academy? We've already kind of done a rough outline of that in the working group, but once it's actually a training standards committee, that may be something you want to revisit once you're a more formal organization. What is the program-based standard going to look like? Is it going to look just like Project 33, which is kind of what the idea behind it was, or is it going to be something that we sort of customize more for Colorado? Decisions to be made. The details of the training program have yet to be set out. That's kind of what I talked about already. It's going to be a hybrid, but the rough outline as it looks right now, although it can change as soon as the committee decides to talk about it further. It's a hybrid program-based, curriculum-based training program. The program-based portion of the program would provide guidance on the components to include in a PSAP's training program. This is similar to what APCO's Project 33 does. Curriculum-based portion of the program would provide a basic training academy for new hires that would be held in multiple locations throughout the state. This is just the rough outline as it's been discussed so far. The one discussion that has been had in the working group meetings, but has not been gone into a lot of detail, is about funding. So far, everything we've talked about could be done with very little funding, depending on the number of volunteers you can get to participate as far as instructors go. But that's probably not a sustainable model. If you're going to have people spending a week at a time instructing an academy or spending time working with local PSAPs to help them meet the program-based standards, you're probably going to have to compensate that in some way. You're either going to have to compensate them, or you're going to have to compensate the agency that they work for that's allowing them to spend time on those outside activities. Training costs for some participating agencies might be necessary, especially if they're sending instructors to teach at an academy. That might also apply to students that they're having to send if they're traveling. I already talked about the cost of the instructor's time, training materials that are used. You know, if they're going to be handouts and manuals and other things that the students have to receive, somebody's going to have to pay for that. Backfill costs for dispatch centers that use trainees to fill positions. This is something that the training committee may decide that they want to try to pursue or may not. But I know that there are probably some rural PSAPs that are already using dispatchers to fill positions, even if they're not fully trained, and they may not be able to let them go unless they have some way of funding the backfill for that person. PSAPs sending their dispatchers through the academy, they may be willing to pay a tuition fee to cover some of these costs. If this is on a voluntary basis, and this is replacing some other costs that you may have to pay in-house if you were doing your own training program. But on the other hand, a lot of PSAPs may not be able to pay for that. So is there some way to set up some sort of a scholarship program for those? So again, those are things that have been kind of touched on as possible topics for the future, but it'll be up to the training committee to decide what topics they want to tackle from here on out. So from that point, I wanted to kind of turn it over to the panel, and I do have some questions for you, just to get the discussion going. But first I want to see, does anybody in the room have any discussions or discussion or questions for the panel members? Oh, I got one.
Sorry.
I was just kind of curious if you've been having a lot of pushback from folks. I mean, I can see that, personally, we're very supportive of this, but I can see some saying, don't tell us what to do and that kind of stuff. Have you encountered a lot of that? No?
Was it just no, or was there more?
I think Kim and I have probably been on, maybe you have too, Jennifer, on almost every conference call or in-person discussion. And quite frankly, I've been really surprised at the willingness of everybody to participate. And it's been more about how can we collaborate and get something like this going. It has not been, I haven't heard one pushback comment at all. I've been really, actually extremely surprised.
And I think that was part of the big discussion at the beginning of this, because the very first question that was tackled is, do we even want to start looking at mandatory training standards or voluntary training standards? One of the things about the mandatory training standards is, as there's more and more push from the federal level or from other organizations to have some sort of training standard in place, is a voluntary training standard going to be enough? But at the very least, if you have a voluntary training standard, you can at least set the ground rules for what we want the training program to look like before it ever gets to that point. And if it never gets to that point, then we've got a great voluntary program that PSAPs could participate in if they wanted to, but didn't have to. Anybody else? My goal is not to read any of my questions.
So in order for a PSAP to meet the standard that you're setting, or voluntarily, or maybe in the future mandatory, it goes that way, do you have a certification process or a testing method, or what's your thoughts going forward?
So far, the discussion has been a testing method at the end of the academy to ensure that the message has been received and understood. So like no other program, if you look at a national program, they all have the testing at the end. So, and to go back to that first question, I think being with Denver and having the quantity of employees, I always worry about, and I'm very sensitive to other agencies, concern as to pulling them into something like this, and it's been quite the opposite. And I think we've all heard it today many, many times, is that providing the same level of service across the state. So I think when that's your goal and that's how you're voicing it, everybody has been very receptive.
Can I add to that? That's all right. One of the other things we were talking about at the last meeting as far as Project 33 goes is setting up some sort of help as well and guidelines for PSAP to PSAP to help meet those APCO Project 33 standards, with the understanding that if your training program met those standards, then you were going to be your training program would be considered certified as well. So.
We also discussed setting up a team that would actually go out and help some of the other PSAPs fill out the application process. Back in January of 2010 is when Denver filled it out, and it was at the time a handwritten, like 30-page document, and it took about 5 or 6 months to actually receive the certification. So I think it's been a little bit streamlined since then. It's online, which helps, but we have received requests as to, I'm stuck, I'm at this point, they're asking for this. And seriously, what Project 33 is, they're not wanting to get into the nitty-gritty of what's being taught. It's really the accountability and the fact that it was taught, the proof that there's signature sheets, there's testing components, and there's outlines and guidelines for what has been taught. So that's something that we would take into consideration when building the academy.
Documentation.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Before I go on, I should ask this first question. Did I get the description of everything that's happened so far right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Never know. To what extent do you believe the process so far has been inclusive? I mean, have we been able to get in people from different areas of the state, different size PSAPs and so forth?
I think so. I mean, like we were saying earlier, it's been pretty much the same core people, but I've been trying to do recruitment myself from some of the smaller agencies, because we want that voice from every corner. And again, the consistency and the standard across the state.
Yeah, actually, the panel sitting here is pretty representative of small, medium, and large centers, I would think. But from my perspective, it's been an extremely inclusive process, and I've seen all sizes of centers, from very small to very large, be participatory in the process and be represented at almost every meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Daryl's done a really good job about getting the word out that we were actually having a conversation. So even the last conference call or meeting, if you will, I thought there must have been 15 or 20 PSAPs represented during the conversation.
One thing that's really impressed me, kind of facilitating the meetings or hosting the meetings, was just the degree to which participation was universal throughout the participants. You know, in a lot of meetings you get like 2 or 3 people who are holding the conversation and everyone else is almost there as a bystander. You really didn't see that at these. It was really, everyone had something to say at some point during the meeting and gave some really good input throughout the process. You know, I already talked a little bit about what a training program might look like based on the discussions that we've had in the working group meetings. But just from your own words, what do you think a training program might look as an end result? Or if you want to give a little more detail to, you know, this is not necessarily what it will look like, because we haven't even formed the committee yet, but just in your kind of vision of what you think a training program in Colorado might look in the end.
I think we have to be sensitive to the specifics for each one of the agencies, and that means we have to go to the basic, but we don't have to be so basic that it's not a valuable program. So we need to look at an outline that targets the needs, which means there's gotta be a needs assessment. So that's where we have to reach out to all of the agencies and find out what they feel is the most important core competencies. So that's what we're gonna be looking at and asking for everyone's help on. So honestly, if it wasn't for Daryl, I probably wouldn't be sitting here because I'm not a committee person. Working at Denver, I have one of the most passionate directors, and maybe that's spilled over a little bit onto what I've been doing. But training is my passion, and that's why I got involved. And then Daryl's been keeping the group going. And I think that if we get it as a standard, we won't go away. How else to describe that? Because this has been going for a couple of years, and then it has just finally taken off in the last 5 or 6 months maybe, as far as the commitment from the 15 or 20 individuals that are there every time.
And I think one of the biggest benefits that we'll have from standardizing guidelines or a training program throughout the state is that we can help each other out. A lot of the discussion we had at the last meeting was talking about the regional programs, and is there a place that we can send people to learn the basics? As Kim was saying, of course, all of our agencies are different, but there are basic things that we must teach each an individual call taker or dispatcher. So being able to help each other out and regionalize those efforts, I think is going to be one of the biggest benefits of having the training program, and then also having a standard to take to the legislation should the issue ever arise. I think is going to be a big help for us to be able to have something in place and take it to them and say, this is what we've worked on, rather than having them decide and not be quite as informed as we would like them to be.
Yeah, I think it was always troubling to me that we never had standards, and the level of service to all the citizens in the state varied depending on which county you happen to call 911 in. So again, I think going back to what the original question was, having a academy classroom that dealt with core competencies, and then when you send the dispatcher back home, then they go back and learn the specifics related to their individual PSAP or their skill set. But the components, and the reason we were looking at the Project 33 model is because it encompasses recruitment and hiring, initial training, on-the-job training, continuing education, which is an area that I think only a couple of us have a lot of concerted effort in, and we could really help out our regional partners if we pool our resources. So really, I think that's my vision of what this thing will evolve to.
Kind of adding on a little bit to what you were just talking about with, if it ever happened to go to the legislature, if somebody comes up and says, we don't have dispatcher training standards in Colorado, and suddenly it becomes an emergency. If we already have a voluntary training program in place, then that's something that we can show to them and say, look, maybe we don't have mandatory training standards in Colorado, but look how many PSAPs are already signed on and are participating in our voluntary training program. And then, even if it was something that became mandatory, not that that's the goal, but if it became mandatory, then at least it's something that we set up as a stakeholder group, and not something that was imposed from some national standard or from a legislator who didn't really know the ins and outs of dispatching. Any other questions or comments for the panel? Just giving an opportunity. I have a couple more questions. And you kind of talked about this a little bit already. You talked about just having the standard in place will help keep the momentum going on the discussion. Is there anything else that we need to do as a stakeholder group in Colorado to keep the momentum going on this and make sure that it doesn't peter out? Because as I mentioned before, there have been other attempts at this or looks at this at the past, probably over the last 2 or 3 decades, just at various points in history. How do we make sure that we don't end up like we did before and not carry through?
I think just remembering that level of service and accountability. Every one of us knows that just socially, we're being held at a higher standard now. And I think that if that is in the back of our minds every time that we go into one of these committees, meetings, that will assist us in keeping the motivation.
That's a great point, and I also think that recruiting people who may not already be in the process, as we go forward is going to be extremely important, because I think in the end, the training standards that we set up in this committee are going to apply eventually to a state level. And the more participation we have by interested and committed individuals, the better it's gonna be. Only you know your PSAP well enough to know if we're representing your needs and your viewpoints the best way that we can. So I think being involved is absolutely crucial.
And I think as the group forms, as the committee forms, and as we reach out to your individual PSAPs and talk about engaging in the conversation and just pointing out what those wins are for you by being involved and by participating and having your employees trained under this process and collectively what it means to service delivery for the whole state, I think it will be important that that committee or that group continues to point those wins out to keep the momentum.
Focus on your accomplishments.
Yeah.
And lastly, because I know a couple of you have kind of been involved in this, but some community colleges in Colorado are now offering or looking at offering certificate programs in public safety dispatching. Is this something that could possibly be incorporated, in your opinion, into the program that we're talking about in some way? Or how do you see that integrating with it, if at all?
I'm not sure. I'm gonna pass it on.
Okay. Well, I'll answer that one.
Okay.
Right now, our agency is actually working with Western Community College. I hope I got that right. Western Colorado Community College, woo, missed a C, in developing an AA program. And actually, I only see that supplementing. Because some of the skill sets we're talking about building this AA program in are some of the same things that we test for: problem solving, critical thinking, and developing those communications type skills, and really don't get down, maybe just skim the surface of emergency dispatching. And I think they would dig into that more once we develop that basic curriculum for what a dispatcher course would be for us as a training standard. But I think it's a supplement. I don't think it's in better than or instead of. I think it's just a supplementary kind of thing. I think that's the way we're approaching it as we're developing it. Is that?
Sure. Does anybody have any comments or questions for the panel? And I am out of questions this time. Okay, well, I want to thank our panel members for being here today. Thank you very much. And it is well before 4 o'clock, but you'll get a little extra time in your afternoon. I want to thank you all for being here. I hope that you'll come back next year. Be watching for a online evaluation of the summit. I'll be sending that to you by email if you registered. If you didn't sign in today, I would ask you to do that on your way out on the sign-in sheet outside, just to keep track of who was here, and so that if anybody ever asks in court, you need an alibi, I'll be able to say, yes, they were here. I have proof they signed in. And I want to just hope you all drive safe today, and thank you very much for coming. Have a good day. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Good to see you again. Yeah, yeah, hi.
That's Lynn, right there.
Yeah, the end.
The end.
Do you need any help carrying anything out?
You know, it's going to take me a while to gather everything up, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's my job.
Yeah. There you go, and then you get.
I really do appreciate. What's
Oh,
that?
not a problem. You get a commute right during rush hour.
Oh yeah, it's lovely. It was worse than coming in here this morning. I mean, not as bad as coming in here this morning, I'm
Yeah.
sure,
Well,
because I was in a hurry.
if you want, I can go dump out the water out of those.
If you want to, that's great.
Yeah,
I
that
really
way
appreciate
you
your.
just don't have that to.
You've been
to deal
terrific
with.
help
I'll
today. I
just leave
appreciate it.
The drinks in
I
there.
sent you an email, I can't see that it went, but
Oh.
I have no idea if I didn't answer your email, or if
Okay.
I didn't answer it correctly, but
those 5 counties that are served by one PSAP, we
Yes.
definitely have a training in place.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if I missed it or if I didn't answer.
Well, that was several months ago, so I couldn't tell you who responded and who didn't. So, that.
When I get something for you, I just been responding.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank
So
you.
those 5 counties do.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you very much.
Walk out without thanking you for your time.
Oh,
So, really
thank you.
appreciate it.
I appreciate you participating in the camera. I really do. Come on, you did great. You didn't get those questions. Those are basic questions. You got it.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too, Joe. Bye.
No, absolutely, and I haven't really.
Well, my thing is, I have to remind myself every month or so, or I will totally forget.
I will totally forget. Good job, Joe.
Thank you.
Things went well.
I think so.
Yeah. And you didn't have to wait for signs or?
No, everything.
Good.
I was a little stressed out this morning, but I'm always stressed out in the morning before these
I was
things.
gonna say, we saw, in fact, we did make a statement. Barb and I were watching you, and then Barb says, oh, he must have got his problem solved. And I turned around, I says, yeah, he's got a plate of food, a cup of coffee, he's good.
Oh, I need it. I'll go ahead.
Yeah, it's easy to let yourself get stressed out when you're doing something like this.
You want me to cut copper here, or do you want to?
Yeah, you can go ahead and shut it off. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody online.
You know, that's something I didn't know, so getting educated on that and maybe intelligent boys probably. Yeah. Right. Daryl, thank you for an awesome day.
Thank you. Thank you for participating.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Bye. Yeah, you can just close it. You can just close the box and shut it off. Yep. What a day, huh? That's right. Yeah, sure seems to. Really? I know we got a few complaints about the